Hi, welcome to Kickstart with Kayla. I'm your host, Kayla Farner, and I'm so excited for you to embark on this journey with me. Now, you may not know who I am, and so therefore I want to introduce myself. Hi, my name is Kayla, and I have a passion for public speaking, for sharing my faith, and for helping you improve your mindset and live a life of fulfillment. Speaking of, this podcast has been a catalyst for all of that, but it didn't just start there. You know, I've had this feeling to start this project for quite some time now. In fact, I was looking through my journal that I have where I write down my prayers, and I'll be quite honest, I'm not consistent in this journal. But I was still going through the entries that I did have, and I found this one prayer from March of this year. And it was saying, I have this feeling to start a podcast. I don't know how and I don't know when, but I keep getting this feeling that this is my next calling. Well, I was surprised to read this because I had thought that I had just come up with this project because I was bored over the summer. But turns out I had been thinking about this for quite some time. As I began to flip through the pages of my journal, I noticed that this prayer came up more frequently. It didn't just show up in one prayer, but instead a plethora of them over the span of a few months. And I find it funny that I have no recollection of that. I simply thought I had came up with this over the summer. Well, I finally decided to start it because this calling kept getting louder and louder and to a point where I could not ignore it. And by louder, I don't mean physically shouting, I mean I could not stop thinking about it. Which this is a big step for me. Now, as I mentioned before, public speaking's my thing. I used to do little gigs at my youth where I'd speak. I spoke at some other faith-based events, but the majority were all around or under 100 people. But this podcasting is different because you have a different audience. You have people from all over that have access to your voice at any time, and you can't see them. That's the one thing I like about being on a stage is I can see who I'm talking to, which may be a hot take, but it's something that I do enjoy. I like making eye contact with my audience. So this is definitely a change for me. And I wanna get into that because I'm so excited that I finally took this leap of faith, and sometimes that's really hard to do. I want you to think, has there ever been a time in your life where you kept having this little nudge or this feeling to embark on something that seemed really scary? It was maybe you're facing your fears or you were going to accept a position that you were unsure of, but it ended up being the best thing for you in the end. I've had that before in many different circumstances, but the one that sticks out to me is how my faith began in the first place. And honestly, without this foundation, I wouldn't even be here talking to a microphone right now. So, when I was in middle school, I did not go to church. I did not like the people at church. I thought it was a environment full of hatred, and it was a place I did not want to be at. I didn't want to surround myself with those people, and so I stopped going. Well, during that time, I didn't really think about God. It wasn't really a thing. I would say, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus," and that was about it. Well, when I was in 8th grade, I had this little nudge, this little feeling to open up my Bible, which was weird because I didn't open up my Bible at all in middle school. The past 3 years, I didn't go to church, but it had been sitting on my nightstand the entire time. Well, I ended up opening it and started reading the book of Galatians, which is one of my favorites. I love Paul's writings, and I was instantly hooked. I read my Bible all the time. I actually remember reading it on the bus on the way home from school. And I was obsessed. And about a month later, somewhere within that time span, I ended up accepting Jesus officially as my Lord and Savior. But about a month later, I had a feeling to start going to morning service. And I thought, okay, I can stomach that because it's not youth. And so I started going with my dad, and my dad always takes notes during the sermon. And so I decided to follow, and I brought a notebook and a pen, and I consumed so much knowledge from the sermons. I began reviewing my notes, color coding my notes. I kept wanting more of a faith, of a relationship with Jesus. Well, unfortunately, this was 2020. So COVID caused our church to become remote and online, and I was kind of stuck at home. Honestly, thank goodness I had formed my relationship then because I got to read my Bible all day and watch sermons. I'm telling you, like I was pretty obsessed. Well, fast forward about 6 months later, I had a third nudge, and that was to go to youth. And that was scary because I didn't like the people at youth. Youth is what drove me away from the church in the first place. Why would I want to go back? I fought this feeling for about a month, and after finally it getting to a point where I was just like, okay, fine, I'll go to church. I'll go to youth. I did, and I was immediately welcomed by a group of girls that would eventually become my best friends. It was an environment where I finally felt a sense of belonging for the first time in my life, and I never looked back. Ended up getting baptized a year later with my sister, and I got fully involved in the church, and here I am today. I share that story because I had 3 different nudges, feelings of overwhelming power that I could not ignore, and they were scary. They were especially scary because it was leading me back to a place that I felt hurt at, and all those feelings went away when I gave it another chance. When I decided to take that leap of faith and accept God's calling to lead me back to church. I don't with this, leaps of faith are scary. And this is why I put off this podcast for so long because I kept asking myself, am I enough for this? Am I qualified? Do I even know enough to ramble for 20, 30 minutes on a podcast by myself? All these other people, they have all this equipment and they're really knowledgeable and they have all these connections. I don't have any of that. They have thousands of listeners. Will I even get 10? I have all these questions that were circulating through my head until finally I was talking to God about it. And I've heard God said, God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. And I stopped in my tracks and I thought, yes, this is what I've been missing. This is my missing piece. I'm not qualified, but God will provide me with the resources and he'll provide me with what I need to fulfill the calling that he's given me. Sometimes we like to wait until we feel ready. But God doesn't always call the ready. He sees us in a time that we may not feel ready, and He says, "This is the time." He makes the calls. We don't make the shots. We don't make the shots in life. He's the one that ultimately does. And He places these dreams in our hearts and promises to walk with us every step of the way. And He gives us these resources, the courage. He gives us the wisdom. He gives us the resource that we need to succeed because He's not going to call you to something that you're going to fail at. I often like to think about this one verse in First Corinthians, another great of writing of Paul's. And I like looking at different versions of of Bible verses, and one that I really like with this particular verse is the Message. Now, the Message likes to combine their verses together. So this version actually is, I was going to say 1 Corinthians 1:27 and 28, but this is 26 through 31. Let's listen, okay? Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you, not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose these nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies? That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything that we have, right thinking and right living, a clean slate and a fresh start, comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. That's why we have the saying, if you're going to blow a horn, blow a trumpet for God. Isn't that a cool way to end a verse? I kind of I really like that. But what Paul is trying to say is that you may be in a position where you feel like a nobody. You feel like you don't have the tools, that you you were not chosen to do something great, that you don't have the qualifications. You're not the smartest, you're not the prettiest, you're not the most athletic, but God's going to use you for a greater good that you can't even imagine. He sees those flaws and says, "No, fair enough." And will use you in ways that you don't even realize. So if you're sitting on a dream or a purpose or a calling that feels bigger than you need to remember that you don't have to have it all figured out to begin with. You just have to be willing to say yes. I don't even know what this podcast is, what it's going to do in my life. Maybe this won't get any sort of attention. Maybe I'm just doing this for a hobby. But what I do know is that this was a calling God had put in my heart that I said yes to. And so while I may not have it all figured out, while I may not be equipped yet, I am called. That's something to really keep in mind, that your purpose is really going to drive you forward. Speaking of, that's actually backed up by science. I forgot to mention, I love studying neuroscience and psychology on the side, and it's really cool to learn about yourself because you actually end up understanding more about yourself than you realize, especially within the brain. And the brain is a cool thing to learn about. Here's some quick stuff on just how impactful understanding your purpose or striving to find your purpose can have on your brain. Number one, it actually strengthens your brain physically. It builds something called cognitive reserve, which is the ability for your brain to bounce back from stress, injuries, and even disease. Isn't that cool? Literally just striving for your purpose can do that. In addition, it lights up your reward system. So we have this reward system in our head that's associated with dopamine. And dopamine is what we feel, what we want when we're craving some sort of gratification. And so with that, the feeling of purpose triggers dopamine, and it makes life feel more meaningful and joyful. Isn't that cool? I'm not done yet. Your purpose can actually boost brain flexibility. We like to call this neuroplasticity. This helps your brain form new neural connections and stay sharp as you age. Neuroplasticity actually declines as you get older, and it's harder to make more neural networks. So it's really good to have it now or to practice it over time, so you're maintaining a large amount of networks, and these neurons can maneuver together, and your brain is ultimately strengthened. Lastly, it also sharpens your decision making. So at the front of your brain, there's this thing called the prefrontal cortex, and it's in charge of decision making. It's in charge of critical thinking, problem solving, clear thinking, and your purpose can sharpen that as well, which can lead to wiser choices. And lastly, I threw this in for fun. It's still a fun fact though. People with a strong purpose can even have a lower risk of stroke and heart disease. So not only does striving for a purpose affect you mentally, but literally can affect you physically. That is so cool. Now, I have touched on this. This kind of goes hand in hand with dopamine and your reward system, because when you achieve something, you get that gratification, you get that satisfaction, and then you oftentimes just move on with your life. That's called happiness. keep in mind, happiness is temporary. I didn't know this till I had had a relationship with Jesus for a few years, and I listened to a podcast for one of my classes, and it was all about the psychology of happiness. And I connected to happiness as temporary, joy is forever. Purpose goes hand in hand with joy, by the way. Happiness can be fleeting, like I said, you can get a promotion or a new car or a good test score, and it feels really good in the moment, but oftentimes that feeling fades away over time. But purpose, on the other hand, can actually keep pulling you forward, even when times are feeling tough, because you know that you're striving for a greater goal. It's rooted in something bigger than yourself, and it makes you think about how your life impacts others. It's so much greater than just a singular moment in time. Instead, it impacts a span of time. And I think that's amazing that God is present in those times of happiness, but ultimately he spans along wherever you are called for your purpose. Every time you're striving for your purpose. I'm not trying to say God is only present during these times. He is present at every time. But if you want that permanent joy, that permanent sense of purposefulness, don't just pick the happiness. Do this, like, this stuff is really cool to me, because actually happiness is part of the world from my research I've done, since it's temporary. So, okay, I've talked about purpose a lot, and you might be wondering, okay, how do I even find my purpose? Like, what if I don't even know it? How you haven't given me any steps on figuring out what this is, like what mine is, how to get it. It's not just going to show up magically, first of all. I want you to think, okay, we're going to be thinking, we're going to be reflecting for a moment. What breaks your heart? Is there something that you've noticed in the world that you can't seem to wrap your head around, that you notice and it makes you so upset you need to provide some sense of change? I felt that when I noticed whenever my family would go to church, I would stay at home and cry because I did not like how I had zero relationship with God. Going back to my story I talked about earlier with not going to church for 3 years. Just think about something, what breaks your heart. Now I want you to think about what brings you joy. Not happiness, joy. This is longer lasting. For me, I feel joy when I have the ability to share my testimony and the word of God with others. It is something that I discovered I enjoyed doing when I was a sophomore in high school. Something I've continued to love, and it's something that has truly impacted my life and continues to impact my life, and I hope it does the same in the future. And so, summing this all together, I want to ask you, where do you feel called to make a difference? Now, you may not think of anything in the moment right now, and that's completely okay. I just want you to think about it. I want you to think about, okay, I know what makes me upset. I know what brings me joy. Now, what can I do about it? And there may be some things where you simply just have to let it be. But there's going to be something that hey, I can make a difference in this. I can put some work in and I can make this happen. Okay, once you've identified that, or even if you haven't identified that, that's a big question. Pray about it. I know, it's so cliche. Everybody always says, I'll be praying for you. Just pray about it. Give your problems to God. So much easier said than done, right? But trust me, prayer is powerful. Let me tell you, I know some people will bow down, close their eyes, put their hands together and pray. Personally, that's not how I pray most of the time. Sometimes I am just out loud yapping to God. I like to do this mostly when I'm driving alone. I will just say, God, I can't believe this happened today. Or God, I'm really stressed out right now. Or God, thank you so much for waking me up this morning. Sometimes, like I said earlier, I write down my prayers. I have a journal. You don't just have to write down prayers. You can write down your feelings and your thoughts, which actually can improve your gratitude. Side note, but it works. And the really cool thing about writing down your prayers is you get to look back on them and see just how much God has moved in your life. If you want to see just how great of a God He is and how much work He can put into your life, start writing down your prayers. I actually just recently started a prayer envelope on my door. I have one envelope for prayers, the other one for prayers that are answered. And I went through my journal entries and wrote down every prayer I had. And in the month of, oh my goodness, in the year of 2025, now keep in mind, I really don't have many journal entries from 2025. I already have 6 prayers that are answered. And they were not small prayers. They were big prayers that would stress me out for weeks. They had already been answered. And I was looking back and reading at the prayers that are yet to be answered, and I thought, wow, I know that something will be done with this prayer. I really like the saying that God answers all prayers in 3 ways, okay? I want you to listen on this. God answers all prayers in 3 ways. Yes, because you deserve it. No, because you deserve better. And not yet, because the best is yet to come. I'm repeating that. God answers all prayers in 3 ways. Yes, because you deserve it. No, because you deserve better. And not yet, because the best is yet to come. Think about that. Pray about it. Write it down. Talk to people that you trust about that calling, that feeling you may have, because you just never know when that feeling is going to get louder and louder. It's going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to change your life once you say, yes, God, I am here. Use me to fulfill the purpose that you have made for my life. Your purpose doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to fulfill the expectations of society. It just has to be your own, your individual purpose. Whatever it may be, you should not be shamed for what your purpose is, because that's what God has called you to do in your life. And remember, you don't have to have all the answers today. Like I said, prayer's powerful, but you just have to take the next step. I wouldn't even be here right now talking to you if I had not said yes and taken that next step. It's scary. It's terrifying. But sometimes you just have to face your fear. It's like when you're about to go on a roller coaster. I don't know if you're scared of roller coasters, but there's this really scary roller coaster, and you're terrified to go on it. But you're with your friend or your dad, and your dad's saying, come on, like it'll be okay. You'll be safe. It'll be fun. You finally say, okay, and you're really scared. You've never been on this ride before. You don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know how many upside downs there are, how many drops. But you get on it and you sit beside your dad. Your dad's calm. Your dad says it's gonna be okay. You go on the ride. The ride finishes, and you had fun. Now, sometimes roller coasters in reality, you're like, yeah, never doing that again. But for the purpose of this analogy, you understand what happened in your life, and you realized, hey, I was with my dad. I was with God. I was okay. There were 5 upside down loop-de-loops and 2 drops, and they were terrifying, but hey, I'm here on the other side, and I'm doing great. I'm doing good. I'm doing better than I was before. I took that leap of faith, and I want you to do the same. That's the whole purpose of kickstarting, because taking that leap of faith is the first thing you have to do to identify and say, yes, I'm taking that leap of faith. And so moving forward, I want you to identify and take action. Kickstart your purpose. Kickstart that leap of faith. Kickstart that faith you have in a higher power, knowing that He's putting you on a plan that is going to provide abundance and success, maybe in ways that you don't even expect, but it'll be worth it. I'd love to hear your story or hear your thoughts. So if you'd like to share those with me, be sure to message me or follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Kickstart with Kayla. Or you can also email me for any inquiries at kickstartwithkayla@gmail.com. I'm so excited to see what God has planned for your life, and always remember that you are loved and you are noticed. I'll see you next week. Bye.